The receiver felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight in my hand, as I stared across my own living room. The afternoon sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but all I felt was a creeping, invasive chill. "I was just calling to ask," I said, my voice betraying a small, hopeful tremor, "when the wedding might be." My daughter-in-law, Chloe, didn't even bother to look away from the television. She just smiled, a thin, sharp smile that never reached her eyes, and took a casual sip of her soda. "Oh, we already got married, Alice," she said, her tone as breezy as if discussing the weather. "It was yesterday. We only invited special people." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Special people. I, Alice Miller, the woman who had paid their $1,200 monthly rent for 3 solid years, was not a special person. I, who had bought every piece of furniture in their apartment, including the very sofa Chloe was lounging on, was not special. I, who had filled their refrigerator time and time again when they claimed they had nothing to eat, did not make the cut. I stood there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. My son, my only son, Daniel, sat beside her, meticulously avoiding my gaze, his eyes fixed on a loose thread on his jeans. The pale blue dress I had picked out for his wedding hung uselessly in my closet, a $350 symbol of my naivete. The new shoes sat in their box beside it. The $2,500 I had set aside in a special envelope for their wedding gift felt like a stack of paper insults. For weeks, I had planned every detail. I had called my sister, Sarah, in Denver to tell her the good news, my voice brimming with a pride that now felt utterly foolish. I had cleaned my house from top to bottom, imagining they might come here, to my home, to celebrate after the ceremony. All of it, every hopeful thought, every small act of love, collapsed in that single poisoned sentence. Only special people. Daniel finally cleared his throat and lifted his gaze, but his eyes were flat, rehearsed. "Mom," he said, the word sounding foreign in his mouth. It was an intimate thing, very small, just the two of us and the witnesses. But I knew it was a lie. The 21st century leaves no secrets. Later that night I saw the photos on social media. I saw Chloe's parents, beaming with pride, posing next to the bride and groom. I saw her siblings and cousins toasting with champagne. I saw Chloe in a stunning white dress, a dress I now realized I had financed when I gave her that $1,500 last month for personal expenses. I saw everything I wasn't supposed to see. Every happy, smiling face that reinforced one simple, brutal fact: I was not wanted. A week later, exactly 7 days after that humiliation, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, Chloe. Her voice was completely different. Gone was the confident, dismissive woman who had excluded me from her wedding. This voice was desperate, thin, and laced with a tremor of panic. "Alice? Alice, the rent is overdue. The landlord is pressuring us. He says if we don't pay by this week, he'll kick us out. You forgot to make the transfer." I was silent for a few seconds, the receiver cool against my cheek. I remembered all the times I had run to the bank, interrupting my own day, to make that transfer. All the times I had canceled my own plans, skipped lunches with friends, to make sure they had a roof over their heads. All the times I had eaten a simple sandwich for dinner so I could give them money for their emergencies, their car repairs, their desires. And now, after they had surgically cut me out of the most important moment of their lives, they had the audacity to call me as if nothing had happened, as if I were just a machine that had skipped a cycle. "Chloe," I said, my voice possessed by a calm that surprised even me. "Didn't I tell you? I only help special people now." The silence on the other end of the line was so deep, so absolute, that I could hear my own heart beating, a slow, steady drum in the quiet of my kitchen. For the first time in 3 years, it was not I who was trembling, but her. "Alice, I don't understand," she stammered, the panic rising in her voice. "We were always special to you. You're like a second mom to me." Lies. All lies. Wrapped in that syrupy sweet voice she only used when she needed something. The same voice she had used to ask me for money for the wedding dress, for the rings, for the honeymoon. They were planning a honeymoon I had been helping finance without even knowing. I would never see the ceremony where those rings were exchanged. For so many years, I had this constant, low-grade feeling of walking on eggshells. I weighed every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to get a crumb of affection from my own son, a flicker of genuine warmth from his wife. I was the perfect mother, the obliging mother-in-law, the silent provider who never protested, who never complained, who never made demands. I was the one who sat quietly in the corner, invisible, until a bill was due. But that phrase, "only special people," had awakened something in me that had been dormant for far too long. It was a cold, hard stone of realization in my gut. That night, after I hung up on Chloe's sputtering protests, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. But they weren't the tears of sadness I was so used to. They were tears of pure, unadulterated anger. Tears of accumulated frustration, of years of silently endured humiliations, of 1,000 tiny cuts I had ignored. I cried for all the times they had made me feel that my love was a burden, my presence an inconvenience, and my money the only thing I had to offer. I cried for the foolish, compliant woman I had been, the woman who had lost herself trying to be indispensable to two people who considered her disposable. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through the blinds, but something inside me had fundamentally changed. It wasn't just the sharp pain of betrayal. It was something deeper, colder, and infinitely stronger. I stood up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same tired, 2-year-old eyes stared back at me, surrounded by wrinkles that told stories of years of giving love and not getting it back. But there was something else in my gaze today, a hardness I didn't recognize, a steel-like determination that had been buried under decades of compliance. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, just as I had every morning for 40 years. But this time, I didn't think about calling Daniel to ask how he had slept. I didn't check my phone in a pathetic anticipation of a message from him, apologizing for the wedding, for the humiliation. For the first time in a very long time, I was my own first concern of the day. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had so often planned surprises for them, counted out bills for their expenses, and cried silently when they treated me with casual indifference. Now, this table would be a witness to something new. I took out my checkbook, my bank statements from the past 3 years, and a legal pad. I started to do the math. I wanted to see, in cold, hard, exact numbers, the full extent of my own foolishness. Monthly rent of $1,200, multiplied by 36 months, $43,200. Groceries and utilities, a conservative $300 a month, $10,800. Birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, anniversary gifts, all lavish because I wanted them to feel loved, at least $5,000. Chloe's medical emergencies that were never specified, $1,200. The down payment on Daniel's car, which he swore he'd pay back, $5,000. The air conditioner repair in their apartment last summer, $900. The living room furniture I bought them when they moved in, $3,500. A miscellaneous tally of emergencies and just need a little help requests, $4,000. The total came to $72,700. I stared at the number. $72,700. That was the exact sum of my generosity. Money I had taken from my retirement, from my savings, from the money my late husband Michael had left, so I could live my last years in peace and dignity. All of it thrown into a void to keep two ungrateful, disrespectful adults comfortable. The phone rang, shattering the silence. I saw Daniel's name on the screen. Normally, my heart would have leaped with a pathetic, desperate hope. I would have run to answer, praying he would finally apologize, finally explain that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. This time, I watched it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, it fell silent. I continued drinking my coffee. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, it was Chloe. I let it ring too. Then, a text message came from Daniel. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." I deleted the message without replying. At 2 in the afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. I hadn't done that in months without a specific utilitarian purpose. It was always to the bank for their transfers, to the supermarket for their groceries, to the pharmacy for Chloe's prescriptions. Today, I went for a walk just because I wanted to feel the sun on my face. I walked past the park where I had taken Daniel as a child. I remembered that sweet, laughing boy who would hug me so tight he'd nearly crack my ribs, the boy who said I was the best mom in the world. When had he become this man? This stranger who looked through me, who treated me like an ATM with feelings. When did I start confusing love with money? When did I start to believe, deep down, that I had to buy my own son's affection? I found myself standing in front of the bank, the same branch where I had so often made those automatic transfers. The branch manager, Mr. Harrison, saw me through the glass and waved. I had known him for years. He had processed every one of my transfers to Daniel and Chloe. He had silently watched my account drain month after month to fill theirs. I went inside and walked directly to his office. "Mr. Harrison," I told him, my voice firm, "I need to cancel the automatic transfers I have programmed for Daniel Miller's account." He looked at me, surprised. For 3 years, these transfers had been as regular as the sunrise. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? Did something happen?" His concern was polite, but I could see the genuine curiosity in his eyes. "What happened, Mr. Harrison, is that I finally opened my eyes," I replied. "I want to cancel everything, and I also want information on how to protect my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money. Period." While Mr. Harrison processed the cancellations, my phone, which I'd left on silent in my purse, buzzed relentlessly. Daniel, Chloe, Daniel again. It was as if they had developed a sixth sense, a radar to detect when their primary source of income was in danger. I ignored it. "Mrs. Miller," Mr. Harrison said as he handed me the confirmation papers, his tone gentle. "I apologize for intruding, but in all these years, I've seen you be very generous with your family. I just hope you are not being pressured to make these changes." His words touched me deeply. This man, who barely knew me beyond bank transactions, showed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own son had in months. "I'm not being pressured, Mr. Harrison," I said, giving him a small, real smile. "On the contrary, I have finally stopped pressuring myself." When I left the bank, I felt strangely light, as if I had left an enormous $72,000 burden in that office. For the first time in years, my money was entirely mine. I had no financial obligations to people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. I went home and thought about all the things I hadn't done to please Daniel and Chloe, the trips I hadn't taken, the friends I no longer saw, the hobbies I had given up. When I pulled into my driveway, I found 3 cars parked in front of my door, Daniel's, Chloe's, and one I didn't recognize. I could see movement inside my house through the living room window. My blood ran cold. They had keys. I had given them keys in case of an emergency, because I trusted them, because I was a fool who thought they would one day take care of me, just as I had taken care of them. I took a deep breath before opening the door. It was time for the first real confrontation of my new life. I opened my own front door and saw a scene I will never forget. Daniel was sitting on my sofa, his head in his hands, the picture of despair. Chloe was pacing back and forth on my carpet like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear, and an older, slick-looking man I didn't know was going through papers on my dining table. My papers. My personal documents. "What is happening here?" I asked. My voice didn't tremble. It was loud, and it echoed in the sudden silence. All 3 of them looked at me as if I were the intruder in my own home. Chloe was the first to speak, her voice sharp with that desperate urgency I had heard on the phone. "Alice, thank God you're here. We need to talk. Mr. Vance is from the law firm we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The question came out of my mouth with an icy calm that surprised me. "What situation? I'm doing perfectly fine." Daniel finally lifted his head. Those eyes, which once belonged to an innocent child, now only reflected financial panic. "Mom, we went to the bank. They told us you canceled all the transfers." "Mr. Harrison explained that you also blocked our access to your accounts. We don't understand why you did that." "Mr. Vance," A man in his 50s in an expensive gray suit and a smile that didn't inspire an ounce of confidence approached me with an outstretched hand. "Mrs. Miller, I am Mr. Vance, a family law attorney. Your children are concerned about your mental well-being and have asked me to assess the situation." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I walked directly to my dining table and collected all my documents that he had been reviewing without my permission. "These are my private papers. You have no right to look at them without my consent, and you have no right to be in my home." "Mom," Daniel interjected, his voice dripping with a condescending tone he had perfected in recent years. "We're worried about you. Your behavior has been very strange lately. First, you financially cut us off without an explanation. Then, you don't answer our calls. We think you might need professional help." Chloe rushed to my side and tried to take my hand, her face a mask of fake tenderness she reserved for moments when she needed something. "Alice, honey, we know you're under a lot of stress. Maybe the loneliness is affecting you more than you think. At your age, episodes of confusion are normal." The word confusion echoed in my head like an alarm bell. Now I understood why they had brought the lawyer. This wasn't about helping me. This was about declaring me mentally incompetent and taking control of my finances. The same woman who had told me they only invited special people to their wedding was now treating me like a senile old fool. "I am not confused," I said, my voice like steel, silencing everyone. "I am clearer than I have been in years, and you are all going to leave my house, right now." Mr. Vance interjected with that smooth, professional voice lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable. "Mrs. Miller, I understand you feel overwhelmed. But your children have a right to intervene if they believe your ability to make sound financial decisions is impaired. They have documented several concerning behaviors." "Concerning behaviors?" The laugh that came from my throat was hoarse, almost cruel. "Like what? Deciding that my $72,000 belongs to me? Deciding to no longer finance the lives of two adults who treat me like dirt?" Chloe jumped as if I had slapped her. "We never treated you badly. You are part of our family. Everything you have will belong to us one day anyway. We are just speeding up the process." There it was, the naked, unvarnished truth. Everything I had would one day belong to them. In their minds, I was already dead, and they were just collecting their inheritance in advance. It didn't matter if I had 20 years or 20 days left. To them, I was just an ATM with legs that had suddenly become problematic. "Out," I said, pointing to the door. "All three of you, get out of my house." Daniel stood up, that angry, childlike pout on his face, the one he made when he didn't get his way. "Mom, we can't just leave. We have obligations. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed for, you can't just cut us off from one day to the next." "I can't?" My voice rose for the first time. "Who says I can't? For 3 years I have paid rent that wasn't even in my name. I filled a refrigerator in a house where I was not welcome. I financed a life that clearly had no place for me." Mr. Vance took a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my table. "Mrs. Miller, we have prepared some documents that could facilitate this transition. A power of attorney that would allow Daniel and Chloe to manage your finances more efficiently. This would just be temporary, of course, until you feel better." I took the folder, and without even opening it, I walked to the kitchen and threw it directly into the trash can. "The only transition that is going to happen here is yours, out the front door." Chloe started to cry, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure frustration, of contained rage. "You can't do this to us, Alice. We were counting on you. We made plans based on your support. We bought things. We took on financial obligations because we knew we could count on you." "Obligations based on my money," I replied, my voice level. "Not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my company, just on my money. And now that I've decided that my money is better used in my own life, I am suddenly a confused old woman who needs legal guardianship." Daniel tried to approach me, but I took a step back. He was no longer the boy who ran into my arms when he had nightmares. He was a 6-year-old man who saw his mother as an obstacle between himself and a comfortable life financed by others. "Mom, we made mistakes," he said, in a voice that was supposed to sound remorseful. "The wedding. It was a misunderstanding. Chloe was nervous. I was under pressure. We can fix this if you just become reasonable again. Reasonable? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Being reasonable means continuing to pay for your life while you treat me like a stranger? It means pretending it doesn't hurt to have been excluded from the most important day of my only son's life? Mr. Vance packed his papers with the brisk efficiency of someone who is used to having proposals rejected. Mrs. Miller, this is not over. Your family has legal options. If you are indeed making irrational decisions due to mental health problems, a judge can determine that you need guardianship. His words were like a physical blow. I realized this was not just a manipulative family visit. It was a real legal threat. They wanted to declare me incompetent to manage my own affairs. Mr. Vance, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, I suggest you do your research thoroughly before you threaten a 72-year-old woman who has managed her finances flawlessly for decades, who raised her son alone after the death of her husband, who ran a household and worked honorably until her retirement, and who, until last week, financially supported 2 completely capable adults. Now get out. Chloe stopped crying and looked at me with a coldness that finally showed her true face. This won't stay like this, Alice. We have rights. And we have lawyers. Perfect, I replied. Hire all the lawyers you want, with your own money, of course, because mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums. The 3 of them walked to the door with the wounded dignity of people who are not used to being told no. Before he went out, Daniel turned to me one last time, his face a mask of anger. Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up alone, with no one to take care of you when you really need it. Daniel, I said, with a deep sadness but also with a crystalline clarity, I am already alone. The difference is that now, it's by my own choice, not by your neglect. As I closed the door behind them and bolted it, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful, profound silence I had heard in years. It was the silence of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep, not out of sadness or regret, but out of the sheer, pulsing adrenaline of having reclaimed control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, planning my next steps like a general preparing for a battle. If Daniel and Chloe wanted to fight, I would give them a war. But it would be a war I would fight with intelligence, not with emotion. At 6 a.m, I was already dressed and ready to go. My first stop was the office of Mr. Grant, the lawyer my late husband Michael and I had used for years. Unlike the slick Mr. Vance, Mr. Grant had an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of the elderly. Mrs. Miller, he told me, his face grim, as I explained the situation, from the wedding to the power of attorney. What your children tried to do yesterday is more common than you think. It's called elder financial abuse, and it's a federal crime. The fact that they entered your house without permission and reviewed your private documents also constitutes a violation. His words both calmed and worried me. They calmed me because they confirmed I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was truly abusive. They worried me because I realized the situation was more serious than I had thought. We have to document everything, Mr. Grant continued, all business. Every transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We will also change your will immediately to protect your assets from future manipulation attempts. We spent 3 hours reviewing my financial records. Mr. Grant let out a low whistle when he saw the total sum. $72,700 in 3 years. Mrs. Miller, with this money, you could have traveled the world. Instead, you financed the lives of 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding. When I left Mr. Grant's office, I had a complete plan. First, I would change all the locks on my house. Second, I would install a security system with cameras. Third, I would open a new bank account at a different bank where they had no contacts. And fourth, I would start living the life I had postponed for years. My next stop was the hardware store. The owner, Mr. Shaw, had known me for years because I was always buying things to fix Daniel and Chloe's apartment. Mrs. Miller, what brings you here today? Another emergency with your son? He asked with the familiarity of a person who had silently witnessed my wasted generosity. No, Mr. Shaw, I said, smiling. This time it's for my own house. I need to change all the locks, and I want them to be of the best quality. He looked at me surprised, but asked no questions. While I was choosing the locks, his son, Ben, who installed security systems, came by. It was Providence in action. Ben, I told him, I also need to install surveillance cameras, the complete system. The price is not an issue. While they were preparing everything for the installation the next day, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Chloe, calling from someone else's phone because I had blocked her number. Alice, it's Chloe. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults. Speak, I said dryly. Listen, I understand you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Daniel and I have talked about it, and we want to make it up to you. How about we have a special dinner to celebrate our wedding with you? We can do it at your house. Cook together, like we used to. The manipulation in her words was so obvious, so clumsy, that I almost had to laugh. Chloe, how much rent do you owe exactly? The silence on the other end confirmed I had hit a nerve. Well, it's 2 months now. $2,400 total. But I'm not just calling for that, Alice. We really miss you in our lives. Do you miss me, or do you miss my money? I asked directly. Both, she replied, with a surprising, desperate honesty. Alice, I won't lie to you. Yes, we need your financial help, but we love you too. You're important to us. If I'm so important, I said, why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to get a call that doesn't ask for money? When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? Another silence. We both knew the answer. Never. Chloe, I'm only going to explain this to you once. For 3 years, you have treated me like an ATM with feelings. You used me. You ignored me. You humiliated me. And finally, you insulted me in the worst possible way. Now that the money is running out, you suddenly discover you love me. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't special enough to be at your wedding. Now, I'm making mine. I hung up and turned the phone off completely. I didn't want any more interruptions on my day of liberation. That afternoon, I went to the beauty salon, a place I hadn't been to in over a year. Mrs. Miller, my favorite stylist, Maria, called out. What a surprise! I thought you had forgotten us. I didn't forget you, Maria, I said, settling into the chair. I just forgot that I also deserve to be pampered. I treated myself to the full treatment. Cut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself, without a single pang of guilt. You look beautiful, Mrs. Miller, she said when she was done. But more than that, you look free. Did something good happen? Yes, Maria, I said, looking at my reflection. I finally learned to say no. When I got home that afternoon, there was a car in front of my door that I didn't recognize. My heart raced, thinking Daniel and Chloe might have come back with reinforcements. But as I got closer, I saw an older woman sitting on the steps of my porch. Mrs. Miller? She asked as I got out of the car. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? I'm Evelyn Reed. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really had a chance to talk. Yesterday. Well, I heard very loud voices in your house and I got worried. Is everything okay? Her sincere concern touched me deeply. Here was a stranger who showed more interest in my well-being than my own son. Come in, Mrs. Reed, I said. I'll make you a coffee, and I'll tell you a story you won't believe. While I made coffee, I told her everything. Evelyn listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished my story, her eyes were filled with a knowing sadness. Alice, she said, you did the right thing. I went through something similar with my daughter 5 years ago. I also thought it was my duty to finance her adult life. I also believed they wouldn't love me if I didn't give them money. What happened? I cut off the money. At first, it was terrible. Threats, emotional blackmail, guilt. But after 6 months, my daughter called to genuinely apologize. Now, we have a real relationship, based on love, not on money. Her words gave me hope. Do you think Daniel and Chloe will understand one day? Maybe yes, maybe no. she answered honestly. But that's no longer your responsibility, Alice. Your responsibility now is to live your own life. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to bed without worrying about whether Daniel and Chloe had money for rent. I went to bed thinking about myself, my plans, my future. And I slept better than I had in years. The next day, Ben and Mr. Shaw came at 8 a.m. to change the locks and install the security system. This system will give you absolute peace of mind, Mrs. Miller, Ben explained. You can see from your phone who is coming to your house. And if someone breaks in, an alert is automatically sent to the police. The irony was not lost on me, installing a security system to protect myself from my own son. While they worked, I called my sister, Sarah, in Denver. Alice, sister, how are you? We haven't spoken in months. I'm good, Sarah. Better than good. I'm calling you to tell you that I've finally come to my senses. I told her the whole story. The wedding, the humiliation, the lawyer, the $72,700. Diana was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was full of a sad anger. Alice, it was about time. Every time we spoke, it broke my heart. All you talked about was how much money you gave them, as if love could be measured in dollars. I wanted to tell you something, but I didn't know how. What did you want to tell me? That Daniel, he never spoke lovingly about you. It was always, my mom helped me with this, or my mom bought me that. Never. I miss my mom, or I love my mom. It was as if you were a service provider, not a person. And Alice, Lena, she always spoke about you in the future tense. When Alice is no longer here, we can remodel her house, or when we inherit, we'll invest in the business, as if they were just waiting for you to die. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. They didn't just see me as an ATM, they saw me as a temporary obstacle. While I was trying to make them happy, they were planning their future without me. The doorbell rang. On the new cameras, I saw it was Evelyn with a mug in her hands. I thought you might need some company, she said with a sincere smile. We sat in my living room, and she told me more about her own experience. My daughter said the exact same thing to me. You're like a second mom. We're special to you. It will all be ours one day anyway. Those are rehearsed phrases, Alice. They learned them from the Emotional Manipulation Handbook. Did you ever feel guilty? I asked her. Every single day for the first 3 months, she answered honestly. But then I saw the results. My daughter had to get a second job. Her husband stopped playing golf every weekend. They learned to live within their means, and more importantly, they learned that I was a person, not a resource. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery to visit Michael's grave. I sat on the grass next to his headstone. Michael, my love, I whispered, I think I lost myself for a while. Our son. He's become someone I don't recognize. Or maybe he was always like this, and I just didn't want to see it. But not anymore, my love. I've learned. I cleaned his grave, replaced the withered flowers, and stayed for an hour, just enjoying the peace. When I got home, there were 3 cars parked in front of my door again. My heart raced, but this time, I was prepared. The cameras showed me it was Daniel, Chloe, and 2 other people I didn't recognize, gesticulating angrily and pointing at my house. I didn't get out of the car. Instead, I called Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant, they are at my house again. This time they've brought more people. Don't get out of the car, Alice. I'll be there right away, and I'm calling the police. After our conversation, I requested a temporary restraining order. They are not allowed to be on your property. Minutes later, Mr. Grant and 2 police patrol cars arrived. I watched the officers talk to Daniel and Chloe. Ma'am, one officer said, approaching my car, you can get out safely. Your visitors are leaving. As I got out, Daniel shouted at me from the street. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You can't call the police on your own son. Daniel, I replied, my voice calm. Family doesn't threaten lawsuits for mental incompetence. Family doesn't break into people's homes. Family doesn't treat their mothers like ATMs. You're going to pay us everything you owe us, Chloe screamed. We have bills you co-signed for. You can't just abandon us. Mr. Grant interjected. "Mrs. Miller, any future communication must be through my office, and I suggest you consult with an attorney before making collection threats, because my client has full documentation of all the voluntary payments she made for 3 years." I watched them drive away, defeated but not giving up. That night, Evelyn invited me for dinner. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. The next few days were strangely peaceful. The surveillance cameras showed me that Daniel and Chloe were driving past my house several times a day, parking for a few minutes, but never getting out. They were studying my routine. On Friday morning, the doorbell rang. The cameras showed a very well-dressed young woman with a folder and a professional smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Alice Miller," she said. "I am a social investigator from the Office of Senior Services. We have received a report that you may be in an at-risk situation, and we need to conduct a wellness check." My blood ran cold. They had escalated. Now they had involved the government. "Can I see your ID?" I asked. It looked genuine. "I am Miss Davis. Can I come in?" I let her in, knowing a refusal would be worse. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "we have received reports that you have shown significant changes in your financial behavior, that you have cut off communication with your family, and that you have shown signs of paranoia by installing unnecessary security systems. We were also told that you have refused medical and legal help from your loved ones." Every word had been carefully chosen by Chloe to make me sound senile. "Miss Davis," I said, "I would like to call my lawyer before answering any questions." "Ma'am, this is a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem." "I am calling my lawyer," I repeated. Mr. Grant was there in 20 minutes. "Miss Davis," he said, "I hope you have a court order, because my client is under my legal representation, and any unauthorized investigation constitutes harassment." "Sir," she replied, "we have reports from concerned family members." "What family?" Mr. Grant asked dryly. "The same family that tried to get her to sign a power of attorney? The same family that broke into her house? The same family that excluded her from important events while living off her money for 3 years?" He placed a folder on the table. "Here is complete documentation of my client's financial and emotional abuse. $72,700. If someone needs to be investigated here, it is not my client." Miss Davis reviewed the documents, her discomfort growing. "Mrs. Miller," she finally asked, "can you explain why you so abruptly stopped financial support?" "Because I finally discovered they were using me," I replied simply. "Because I realized that to them, I wasn't a mother, but a bank account. My son is 36 years old, married, and perfectly capable of supporting himself. Financing his adult life is not my responsibility. It is my choice, and I have chosen not to do so anymore." Miss Davis closed her folder. "Mrs. Miller, based on this conversation and the documentation, I see no indication that you are at risk or in need of intervention. I will close this case." After she left, Mr. Grant sighed. "Alice, this is going to continue to escalate. They are desperate. What else can they do? They can file a lawsuit for incompetence. It's expensive and hard to win, but if they find a sympathetic judge, they could get a guardian assigned." The thought terrified me. That evening, Evelyn organized an emergency meeting with her friends from the garden club, Beatrice, Rosa, and June. When I told them, they were outraged. "We will testify in your favor, Alice," Beatrice said, her 80-year-old eyes flashing. "We have all been through similar situations. What your children are doing is nothing new. For generations, greedy children have tried to declare their parents insane to get their money. But you have something many victims don't: documentation, legal support, and friends who can testify for you. What hurts most," I confessed, "is not the money. It's realizing I never had the love I thought I had." "Alice," Beatrice said, taking my hand, "true love cannot be bought or sold. If you had to pay for it, it was never real." Her words were a balm. "You know," I said to my new friends, "loneliness surrounded by people who don't love you is worse than being lonely on your own. At least now when I am alone, I am in good company." We toasted to our newfound wisdom. A month later, Mr. Grant came to my house with a grim expression. "Alice, they've done it. They filed a formal lawsuit for mental incompetence in family court. They are requesting to have a legal guardian assigned to you." The words fell on me like stones. My own son was trying to legally declare me incompetent to steal my money. What evidence could they have? They have statements from 3 witnesses. They also submitted fabricated unpaid doctor's bills and statements about medications you supposedly hoarded. But that's a lie. I know. The witnesses are Chloe, a neighbor named Mr. Peterson, and your pharmacist, a Mr. Jacobs. We went to the pharmacy together. Mr. Jacobs, I asked, did you sign a statement about my medication habits? He turned red. Mrs. Miller, your daughter-in-law came in. She said she was worried. She brought a document that said I was confirming you had irregular medication purchases. I thought it was for her health insurance. I didn't know it was for a lawsuit. He immediately agreed to write a statement, explaining exactly how he had been tricked. Next, we confronted Mr. Peterson, the hostile neighbor. And you're right, I did. He snarled. That woman is crazy. Installing cameras, having strangers visit, yelling at her family in the street. It was clear he had taken everything out of context. There was no reasoning with him. Alice, Mr. Grant said, we need our own psychiatric evaluation. I have a colleague, Dr. Chen, an expert in assessing mental capacity. The next day, I met with Dr. Chen. For 2 hours, she gave me cognitive tests, memory exercises, and assessed my financial understanding. Mrs. Miller, she said at the end, your results are well above average for your age. You are not only mentally competent, but your cognitive function is excellent. Based on what you've told me, this is a classic, tragic case of elder financial exploitation. The trial came 3 weeks later. I woke up early, put on my best black suit, and looked at myself in the mirror. Today, my dignity, my freedom, and my right to live free from abuse would be judged. In the courthouse hallway, I saw Daniel in a new suit and Lena dressed in black, as if for a funeral. Maybe it was the funeral of our family relationship. Lena held my gaze with a coldness that confirmed this was just a business transaction. Their lawyer began. Your Honor, Mrs. Alice Miller has shown a clear mental decline. She has cut off financial support, installed security systems due to paranoia, and isolated herself under the influence of neighbors and lawyers who are taking advantage of her vulnerable situation. Lena was first to testify. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. She cried as she described how I had become hostile and paranoid. She has always been like a second mom to me. She wept. We just want to help her. When Mr. Grant cross-examined her, the cracks appeared. Mrs. Miller, can you tell the court when was the last time you called my client without asking for money? She stammered. Is it true that when my client asked about the wedding, you told her you had only invited special people? Lena's face turned red. Those words were taken out of context. What would be the right context? Mr. Grant asked quietly. To tell your mother-in-law that she is not a special person. She couldn't answer. Daniel was next. Seeing him on the witness stand, swearing to tell the truth while preparing to lie about my mental health, was the most painful moment of my life. My mom has become erratic and irrational, he testified. We believe she is being manipulated. Mr. Grant's cross-examination was devastating. Mr. Miller, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years? I don't know the exact amount. Does $72,700 sound about right? Daniel paled. And how many times have you visited your mother without asking for money? The silence was deafening. Is it true you and your wife broke into my client's house and brought a lawyer to pressure her into signing a power of attorney? We wanted to help her manage her finances. Do you, at 36 years old, need the help of your 2-year-old mother to pay your rent? Then it was our turn. Mr. Jacobs, the pharmacist, explained how he was tricked. Dr. Chen presented her flawless evaluation of my excellent cognitive function. Mr. Jacobs, Harrison from the bank testified that my decisions were rational and decisive. Evelyn, Beatrice, Rosa, and June all testified to my clarity, my vitality, and my healthy social life. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand with my head held high. Mr. Grant guided me as I told my story. The $72,700, the humiliation of the wedding, the constant manipulation, the invasion of my home, the legal threats. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Grant finally asked, Why did you decide to stop financial support for your son and daughter-in-law?" I looked at the judge, then at my son. "Because I finally understood," I said, my voice clear and strong, "that what I was getting from them was not love. It was a commercial transaction disguised as a family relationship. My money was welcome, but I, as a person, was not." "Do you regret your decision?" "I only regret," I said, "that it took me so long to make it." In his closing argument, Mr. Grant was devastating. "Your Honor, what we have seen here is not the case of an incompetent old woman. It is the case of a woman who has finally found the strength to free herself from years of financial and emotional abuse. The plaintiffs have presented no real medical evidence of incompetence. What they have presented is frustration, because their source of income has decided to exercise her legal and moral right to protect her own resources." Judge Evans retired to deliberate. When he returned, his expression was serious. After reviewing all the evidence, it is obvious to this court that Mrs. Alice Miller is in full possession of her mental faculties. Her financial decisions, as painful as they may be for her family, are completely rational and within her rights. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that this lawsuit is motivated by financial interest rather than by genuine concern. The court completely denies the request for guardianship. I had won. I had won back my freedom, my dignity, and my life. When we left the courthouse, Lena gave me a look of pure hatred. Daniel looked at me one last time, and for a second, I saw something that might have been regret, but it was already too late. That night, Evelyn and my friends threw a celebration at my house. "Alice," Beatrice told me, "today, you didn't just win a trial, you won back your life." She was right. 3 months later, I sold my house and moved to a beautiful apartment downtown. I donated a significant portion of my money to organizations that protect the elderly from financial abuse. With the rest, I began to live. I traveled through Europe, I took art classes, I joined volunteer groups. I never heard from Daniel and Chloe again. I heard from my sister Sarah that they had been forced to move to a smaller apartment and that Chloe had found a job for the first time in her life. Perhaps adversity would teach them what my generosity never could, the value of honest work and independence. Some nights, as I look at the stars from my new balcony, I think about the woman I was a year ago, fearful, manipulated, and believing she had to buy love. That woman is gone. And in her place, someone has been born who understands a fundamental truth. True love never has a price, and your own freedom is never too expensive. My name is Alice. I am 72 years old, and I have finally learned that the most important person I have to love and protect is myself.